my father, my mother, Paul, Du Bois, Louis Burnham, and Dorothy Burnham, James Jackson and Esther Jackson, Ben Davis and his wife, Alpheus Hunton and Dorothea Hunton, so many African Americans who were communists, who were leftists, who dedicated their lives to the struggle for the freedom of their people and against capitalist exploitation.
How you doing, MaryLouise?
I'm fine. How are you?
Fine, fine. Yeah, we
Good.
just finished doing the reading, and I want people to know how much of a unique individual you had a chance to grow up with some outstanding personalities. You was the daughter of William Patterson and Louise Patterson. You had a chance to meet like Paul Robeson. You met Harry Belafonte too, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So yeah, can you just talk a little bit? What's the first question you have for her?
Yeah. Well, basically, the first question was about her, Mr. William Patterson and Paul Robeson's effect on Belafonte. So I wrote a piece called Greenwood 1964 2012, basically depicting a story that Mr. Belafonte and Sidney Poitier took to Greenwood, Mississippi, for relief funds for voting and all the things that were going on down there. And I got to learn about your father, which I really hate to admit that I didn't know much about. And through Mr. Robeson, because through my research for the play, that's where I got to discover him and how inspired he was by your father, and then how that kind of trickled down through Mr. Belafonte and his activism. So I just wanted to talk about that really quick and see if you can shed some light on that impact that your father had left through Mr. Robeson all the way to Mr. Belafonte.
Excuse me. First of all, I want to thank you for inviting me to participate in this event tonight, and I hope it was I hope it is and continues to be a very successful event. So I would say that in terms of Harry, and not only Harry Belafonte, but a number of the other members of the American Negro Theater, who happened to be Ossie and Ruby Davis, well, Ossie Davis, Ruby Dee, at the time. Sidney Poitier was there as well, so was an actress by the name of Bonnie Burroughs, and many others. That they were influenced very much by progressive politics and leftist politics, and in fact by people like my parents, who were African American communists. Always talking to them about the fight for, at that time, we were called Negroes, Negro freedom, Negro liberation, siding with workers, Negro workers who might be on strike, helping to organize workers, including, at times white workers. But in industries where black workers or Negro workers were predominant, for instance, in the Hospital Workers Union in New York, 1199, which Harry Belafonte became very involved with. In fact, he had an office on the top floor of their building on 43rd Street, right off 8th Avenue in New York City. He was very much influenced by them and understood that, as Paul Robeson said, as an artist, he had to choose sides. He could choose the side of freedom, or he could choose the side of continued oppression. And for him, there was no question about which side he would choose. And I think that was true. Harry adopted that as his belief as well. And not only in terms of Negro people here, but black people all over the world. And not only black people, but all oppressed people. And I think that came to Harry really from his exposure to Paul and to my father. My mother and I were in Moscow in 1960, Moscow, the then U.S.A, and we met Harry, and that's when I first met him, in the elevator of a hotel where we were all staying. And, he was there as an artist, looking at how workers um, did workers' art, did people's art, did what was called prop art or agitational propaganda art, and how to talk to people about how to fight for their rights, and the imperative to fight for their rights. I don't want to go on, but that's how I think, Harry and Ossie and Ruby and Viney all came to be close to my parents, who were open members of the Communist Party. By that time, my mother was not, but my father was.
Thank you for that. I also had a follow-up. Why do you feel it's so difficult to find more information about your father? Because, like I said, I felt ashamed that I discovered him later on in my life when I was, getting this play together. So why do you feel like it's hard to? Why did they cover his tremendous history up so much?
Well, I guess it's because they wanted to continue to dominate and to be in power. And my father was about, overturning that and having working people and minorities, especially African Americans, be in power and make the decisions that govern their lives and be the governors of their lives. So it was absolutely intentional. If your belief is, in terms of your economic system, that you have one person who owns a factory, and then that person hires people to work in the factory, and then that person pays those people the least amount that they can get away with paying, and they keep the rest. Well, if that's the system that you have created, and why would you want to give that up? And if someone is talking about reversing that, overturning that, why would you want to give them a platform? And as a matter of fact, why would you want people to know about them at all? Why would you want people to know that it's possible, that there's another way to live, that there's another economic system that might be possible, and that there are places in the world where they are attempting to implement that system. It seems to me, if I was a Rockefeller, I'd want to continue being a Rockefeller, and I would erase any trace of William L. Patterson or William L. Pattersons, for that matter. And I would not give them a platform. And they weren't. And at one point my father was, in fact, in jail and discredited. And as you know, one of the ways of discrediting African Americans especially, who were fighting for, at that point, just civil rights, like Dr. Martin Luther King, was to label that person a communist, which meant that you were, in fact, dismissing them. You were saying this person is not legitimate. This person has no voice. This person, as a matter of fact, is evil and should not be listened to. If you are the one that writes the history books, then you don't have them in there. If you're the one who controls the publishing industry, then you don't publish their books. If you're the one who controls the media, then you don't have them on it. And that's why you and others did not know that history, did not know that there were African American communists, that there were African American socialists, African American anarchists. We don't even know the history of African American labor people, unionists. We don't know about how sharecroppers were being organized in the South to be unionized, or the struggles around unionizing Birmingham Steel, or the fact that there were black caucuses in the automotive industry, or in the transport industry in New York City. There's so much that we don't know that has been deliberately, intentionally omitted. Because if you can keep someone ignorant, it's easier to keep your knee on their neck. And that's why you don't know.
Yeah, MaryLouise, I want to ask. I want to ask you, talk a little about your book, your excellent book, Letters of the Langston, about Langston Hughes. And then I want to have Ken, who read the part of your father, and Gary, who read the part of Paul Robeson, ask you a question. But can you tell people about the close relationship with the great poet Langston Hughes?
Yes, thank you for asking the question. I'd love to. I just want to add to the last question that people should also know about Paul Robeson and my father, William L. Patterson, and Dr. W.E.B. Du Bois, and Alpheus Hunton, James Jackson, Louis Burnham, Ed Strong, and so many other African Americans who were leftists, and for that matter, A. Philip Randolph, who was a socialist. People need to know that these were people who were highly educated, real deep, profound thinkers, who made the choice that they made to fight capitalism intentionally, unapologetically, understanding that you could not look to your oppressor to be your savior. That was foolhardy at best. In terms of the book, and lastly, not lastly, but let me also add that black artists coming out of the 30s and the 40s, so many of them, whether they were singers or whether they were painters, writers, actors, were influenced by the Russian Revolution, which occurred in 1917, and the possibility of artists, the freedom of artists to really create and get produced, be able to have it distributed, their work distributed in this new workers' land. So yes, the Soviet Union has turned out to be something that was not expected, at least not by my parents. My mother used to say that the scientist Marie Curie took more than 1,000 experiments to get it right. So this is the first time that the world has seen the attempts of workers to take over government and to govern themselves. And Langston was very much influenced by that. These are also people, Langston included, but my father and Paul Robeson, who were just really one generation away from enslavement. And that experience of slavery was still very much alive in them. And it created this passion within them to fight racism, to fight Jim Crow, to fight our, our stereotypes, to fight, our continued exploitation and oppression. And Langston was very much a part of that. He believed that. He believed that workers should be able to appreciate the fruits of their own labor. I mean, if you make an apple pie and then somebody comes along and takes it and leaves you maybe one slice and takes the whole rest of the whole pie, and they had nothing to do with it. They didn't produce it in any way. I mean, it was your labor that did it. I mean, would you allow that to happen? So the answer is no, you wouldn't. If you could stop it, you wouldn't allow it to happen. And that was Langston. And so he met my mother in at Hampton College in 1928. His first book, The Weary Blues, had been published, and he was on a tour of the South promoting his book. And he went to Hampton and he met my mother. There were very few African American teachers teaching at Hampton at the time, and so he met all of them. I think there were 5 of them. And they kind of just fell in. These were, Langston and my mother were born outside of a big city. They grew up mostly in white neighborhoods. They did not grow up with their parents for the most part. My mother recalls being called the N-word every single day of her life. And they became friends. So when Louise left Hampton after her year teaching there and came to New York, Langston was in New York, and they resumed their that initial friendship became cemented through their employment, so to speak, by a patron of the arts by the name of Charlotte Osgood Mason, a rich white woman who gave money to African American writers, artists, for instance, Zora Neale Hurston and Langston, to write so that they didn't have to work. They could just write. They could just create. And my mother was hired by Mrs. Mason to be their secretary. So that's how Louise and Langston met. My mother then marries my father, and Langston and Pat probably knew each other. We don't have any evidence of that, or I haven't found any evidence of that, but they probably knew each other during the Harlem Renaissance, when both of them were in Harlem. And Harlem was a pretty small community, filled to the brim with all kind of creative and political bubbling, and fervor, but it was small. Everybody knew everybody. So Louise and Langston resumed their friendship, and it grows. And then her best friend from California, Evelyn Crawford, and her husband then are introduced by Louise to Langston. He meets the husband on a trip to the Soviet Union in 1932 that my mother organized for 22 Negroes to go to Moscow and make a film called Black and White, which was actually never made. But over the next 40 years, they corresponded, the 5 of them, my parents and my co-author's parents. They corresponded. They wrote letters, since there was no internet, no ability to stay in touch other than by writing letters or writing telegrams or using the telephone, which was pretty expensive. So when they were no longer with us, when they were no longer alive, my co-author Evelyn Louise Crawford and I had that correspondence, and we felt that correspondence belonged to the world, really. that the world should see that Langston may have tactically retreated from some of his leftist writings. He may have done that, but that we saw that as a tactical retreat, that Langston never gave up his leftist beliefs. And so we felt that the correspondence that we had that showed that should be shared with the world. Because what had happened with Langston, and often happens with our African American leaders, especially if they're radical, leftist radicals, is that they are then kind of whitewashed, right? They're cleansed of that. So Paul Robeson is a great singer, he's a great humanist, but no one talks, or they don't want to talk about how he felt about socialism vis-a-vis capitalism. The same with Dr. Martin Luther King. They want to talk about the dream speech, but they don't want to talk about some of his other more radical writings. And they don't want us to know about those. So we felt this correspondence belonged to the world. And we took us 15 years to do it, but we put it into a book. We narrated and we did a lot of research. But we wrote a connecting kind of narrative because there were periods when there were very few letters. And we also needed to let people know the context, the political context, because they talked about a lot of activities that they were involved in, organizations they were involved in. So we knew that people would not be aware of those, and we needed to give the context for these letters. So that's the book. It's an amazing correspondence. I feel that it's a loss that people no longer write letters, actually. They're funny, they're gossipy, they are sad, they are encouraging, they are sometimes critical, but always with love and respect for each other, and especially for Langston, really having Langston's back. And so the book is called Letters from Langston, from the Harlem Renaissance to the Red Scare and Beyond. And it'd be wonderful, I think, if people were to get the book, or at least, from the library, if you can't buy it, but encourage your library to order the book because you want to get it from them. And read it and see another side of Langston that has not had an opportunity to be introduced to the world.
Robin, Kevin, he wrote the introduction.
Robin Kelly. Yeah, thank you for sharing that. I wanted to also ask about the group that your mother and Shirley Graham Du Bois and Eslanda Robeson, Sojourner Truth Group. I wanted to shed some light on that, and if you could give us a little bit more information about that, that's fantastic.
So and thank you for the question, and all the questions. In 1951, many years ago, right, many decades ago, in 1951, my father and Robeson presented a petition called We Charge Genocide to the United Nations. And they were charging the United States government with genocide against its Negro citizens. Paul presented or tried to present the petition here in New York, and my father went to Paris. Upon my father's return from Paris, his passport was rescinded and revoked, and so Paul's passport was taken, and Dr. W.E.B. Du Bois' passport was taken. Subsequently, not at the exact same time. My mother and Bea Richards, the actress, was living with our family at the time, and she and my mother, along with, as you mentioned, Shirley Graham Du Bois and Eslanda Robeson and Charlotte Bass, they went to the Pentagon and they went to Congress. And they took, for instance, there were these wind-up dolls, metal dolls that were Sambos, big red lips, black skin, bulging white eyes, that the U.S. Military had taken over to places like Japan, so to Asia, and to Europe as symbols and images of African Americans. And you would wind up these dolls, and then they would do a kind of a jig with this grinning face, distorted face. And they went and they were going to demand that these men be released, that their passports, my father be released from jail. Paul wasn't in jail, but what had happened was that suddenly he could no longer perform in any public venues or private venues for that matter. They suddenly slammed their doors on him. Here was the most celebrated artist at that time in this country and actually around the world. And suddenly all the doors for his concert appearances, etc., were slammed, closed. And so that's what they did. And it was, it was unheard of. This was absolutely new and daring. And the government came down on them very hard. A lot of anti-communism. And they were ultimately forced to cease their activities. But they were in existence for over 2 years. And they did make, they made the connection way before the term intersectionality is coined. They talked about the triple oppression of Black women, being oppressed by race, being oppressed by class, and being oppressed by gender. So it was an incredible group of women. Again, these women were, they were workers, they were intellectuals, they were artists, they were people like Charlotte Bass, they were publicists, and then some of them were just ordinary community activists who said, this has got to stop. And that's the Sojourners for Truth and Justice. A lot has been written about them in a number of different books. Most, recently, a number of different books have highlighted their importance. And clearly what they did in the 1950s, then there's that thread that runs through to what people like Kimberly Crenshaw are talking about today.
Thank you for joining us. I'm Gary Robinson. I'm with Paul Robeson. Another question for you. When I was studying Paul Robeson, he, like your father, was an attorney. And when Paul started...
Can you say that again? I'm sorry. I'm at a graduation party for my grandson, and there's a lot of laughter in the background, and I didn't hear what you said.
Okay, no problem. When I was studying Paul Robeson, he's an attorney like your father. And from who he was working with, he asked the secretary to take dictation. And she said, she's not taking dictation from the nigger. And so he was disillusioned that no one would take him as a lawyer. And so I'm wondering how your father dealt with that. What made him continue to be a lawyer? I'm sure you faced a lot of things that Paul faced as well. What made your father stick in there and continue his practice and become very successful?
Well, my father couldn't sing. No, that's a poor joke. But when my father graduated from Bowles Hall in San Francisco, and he was the first African American to do so. He was also valedictorian, and the valedictorian comes to New York. In New York, he actually joins the prestigious law firm in Harlem of Diet and Hall, and they become Diet, Hall, and Patterson. I think Pat, I can't speak for Paul. I don't know why. Knowing about him more than knowing him, because I knew him mostly as a child and then as a teenager. Paul was very courageous and very strong. So I can't believe, or I can't accept. It seems inconceivable to me that a secretary saying, "I won't take dictation," was enough for him to be turned off from the practice of the law. Be that as it may, I can't argue that. I'm just saying I can't believe that story. That alone was what caused him to turn away from practicing the law. In my father's case, I think he really wanted to. And so he joins his law firm. And but they were defending gangsters. And I think Pat talks about he was making good money, but he was not satisfied with that. And there's such political fervor going on. The Russian Revolution, as I said, had just occurred in 1917. You had the Red Summer of 1919. You have the Harlem Renaissance. And then you had this case that you may not have ever heard of two Italian anarchists in Boston who are in jail and on trial for their lives. They were called Sacco and Vanzetti. And the Sacco and Vanzetti case. And my father goes to Boston. And there was also a lot of political, and I mentioned, there was a lot of political fervor in Harlem. There was a famous corner, there is a famous corner on 125th Street in Harlem. So it's a main street in Harlem, like saying Crenshaw Avenue, I guess, here in LA, and 7th Avenue, which is now Adam Clayton Powell Boulevard. And you'd have speakers. They'd be on ladders. They'd take out these wooden ladders and they'd climb up several steps on the rungs on the ladder, and then they would sit on a rung and then they would give a speech. And these were political people. These were also union organizers, and they would talk about the times, and they'd be giving an analysis of the times, and they would be trying to get people to join them, to join their organization. So there was just a lot of energy and a lot of activity in Harlem at that time. This confluence of both the political possibilities and the cultural freedom that the new Negro that Langston epitomized was expressing. So Dad gets involved in the Sacco and Vanzetti case. He goes to Boston. He sees that not only are Negro people oppressed and exploited, but Italians are as well. And so that kind of broadens his thinking in terms of what is the oppression. The oppression is not just racial, it's also economic, financial oppression. And that gets him thinking about economic systems, not just political systems or social systems, but economic systems as well. And he comes back to New York. He was arrested in Boston. They would not allow him to ride inside what was called the paddy wagon, or the police car, the police truck. They handcuffed back door of the truck. And they rode him to the police station, and they jailed him. So he comes back from that experience, and he decides that he wants to, he needs to change the system. The system needs to be changed. That there's no Negro liberation while there's still economic exploitation. And so that just seemed simple to him. And he goes off to the Soviet Union for several years, comes back, and the Scottsboro Nine, the Scottsboro Boys, this was a case in Scottsboro, Alabama, of 9 black boys who were riding on a freight train. This is during the Great Depression, when people were traveling around the country, often on freight trains, looking for work anywhere to be had. And these young men, the youngest was 14 years old, and the eldest was 19 years old, are on this freight car, and the freight car is stopped because they're traveling, they haven't paid. There are a bunch of white boys on the car as well. And there are 2 white girls who were actually traveling as boys. So they were kind of masquerading as boys. But they're discovered to be girls, and they're all going to be hauled off to jail. They were going to be accused of prostitution when they, however this happened, they cried rape, saying that these 9 boys raped them. And so that takes any spotlight off of them, and it becomes this rape case in the South. And as you know, the punishment for rape for a black man accused of raping a white woman was death. And so they are put on trial and found guilty. And at that point, the International Labor Defense and the NAACP get involved in their case. My father was at that point with the International Labor Defense, and so he continued on as a lawyer. After that case of the Scottsboro Nine, he goes on to be involved in numerous cases, wrongful arrests and wrongful convictions, often facing, and often the convicted facing the death penalty. And he becomes the head of an organization called the Civil Rights Congress, which was taking on these cases, mostly in the South, but not exclusively, of wrongful arrest and wrongful charges, most of the time of rape of a white woman. And that's what he does the rest of his life. So he becomes a civil rights lawyer, writes his own his autobiography, which he entitled "The Man Who Cried Genocide." But there is a wonderful also biography by Professor Gerald Horn called William L. Patterson, "The Man Who Cried Genocide." Genocide and the Globalization of the African American Liberation Struggle. For people who'd like to read that and know more about Pat. And my mother, Louise Patterson, there is a biography of her by Keith Gilliard. And that's available, they're all available, of course, on Amazon, although I don't like to push Amazon. If you could get your local bookstore to order the books, that would be better. But they're available on Amazon.
Thank you very much.
Can we get
You're welcome.
Can we get and then if anybody out there have a question, who would let it go? Okay.
Hello, my name is Ken Sagos. I play Mr. William Patterson in the movie.
Oh,
And
hello.
thank you. First of all, congratulations to your grandson for graduation, and thank you for taking the time out and without being with us. But I have a question. My question is I want to know about the man. not when he was out there being the hero for everybody else, but when he came home, he had to take off that cape. And I can see that he was a loving man to listening to you. But I just want to know if you could just tell me something about the man, his smile sometimes, when he didn't have the weight of the world on him. You know, when he wasn't that hero, but the man.
Please, forgive me, but tell me your name again.
Ken Salos.
Ken. So Ken, my father was, to me anyway, an incredible human being. The relationship that he and my mother created, the one that they had, was one of real friendship. I think they were probably each one's best friend. And then they created a loving home for me. When they married, they were older. So my mother was in her 40s, my father was in his 50s. And so they were mature adults. My father once told me, when I asked him, I'd never heard my parents argue, ever. I never heard them raise their voices towards one another. I never heard them use words that were hurtful or disrespectful to each other. And I once asked him about that, and he said to me that the struggle outside was too great, and that his home actually had to be a sanctuary, where he had peace and quiet and and no strife, no tension. And they didn't have that. He was every cell in his body was political, I think. But he was warm and funny. He could be very funny. He also recited poetry. Langston, Paul Laurence Dunbar, Walt Whitman, Carl Sandburg were his favorites. But he could even recite Tennyson and Longfellow that he learned, poetry that he learned and had to memorize back in public school. He was intellectually quite curious. He didn't read as expansively as my mother, who also read mysteries. Dad didn't read mysteries, but their relationship, I guess, is what I wanted to highlight, was really what they kind of lived, what they believed. We want a world that's a peaceful world. We want a just world. We want a fair world. Dad cooked. He washed dishes. He washed clothes. He ironed. He would make a bed. He could wash the bathtub, and he did. There was not a chore in the house that he couldn't do and didn't do. And he would call me, because I was a latchkey kid, both of my parents worked, so I came home to an empty house. And he would call me from work and he would say, your mother worked all day. Have you, start dinner. And I would. They were both great cooks and taught me how to cook very early. But that's the kind of person he was. Caring, thoughtful, really thoughtful, profoundly thoughtful. He would make breakfast in the morning, when he woke up in the morning, and he believed that it was a revolutionary's responsibility to take care of your body, that you had to be healthy. If you were a soldier in this struggle for liberation, you had to be as healthy as you possibly could be. And so he jumped rope in the morning. And he didn't smoke and he mother smoked and drank. But he didn't do either one of those. And he would wake up early in the morning, he would jump rope dutifully every morning, 7 days a week. If there were 8, he would have done it 8 days a week. And he would jump rope, and then he would make breakfast, and then he would take breakfast to my mother on a tray, along with the New York Times, because she did the puzzle. So that's the household that I grew up in, and that's the relationship that I saw. That's the politics of interpersonal relationships. That's what I saw, and their friends, who I often, because of their children were the same age I was, I would spend the night. Of course, they would spend the night with me. But I saw Louis Burnham do the same thing with Dorothy, and I saw James Jackson do the same thing with Esther. I never saw anything but profound respect and between them, and love, real love. The kind that left room for mistakes, but also forgiveness. The kind that left room for you to be who you were and to encourage you to be the best you possible. They taught me, so they played games like cards, and they taught me how to play pinochle and how to play bridge. We played Scrabble. And of course, but my dad would make up words, and then you always had to challenge him, because he'd make up these words and be very and try to argue that the word was really a legitimate word. But that's who he was. So there was a playful side, but there was this political side to him. And its carryover into his personal life was the profound respect that he had for my mother.
That's outstanding. Thank you so much for doing that. Before you go, really quick, I just wanted to ask one last question. What are you working on now? Is there anything we can check you out for that you got going on?
I am trying to I'm trying to do a memoir, and I started in 21, but that was interrupted, and so I need to get back to it. Otherwise, I've been trying, like so many to other people in the health field, to talk about racism in healthcare, talk about the need for a universal health system in this country. We need to have universal health care. It is shameful that the United States, with as much money as it spends on health or on medicine and the practice of medicine, not on health really. In fact, they spend hardly any money on health. That we don't have universal health care. And so I'm a part of that struggle, trying to make people aware that there is a movement for universal health care, to please join it, to harangue your Washington and local officials, for that matter, state officials, about having universal health care on a state level, but we really need it on a national level. So those are the two things that have been occupying my time. I have not gotten back to the memoir, although I'm hoping to sometime before the end of this year to get back to it. So I hope I'll have something to talk to you about next year, a little more concretely.
All right. Thank you so much for joining us. Patterson and thank you so much.
Brothers, there's only one blood, cause it ain't no sense in us trampling on the stones. It's us, down to the bone. Blood is thick, waters were known well, cousins were kept apart. Mothers were often memories. Fathers were not favorites on the farm, for he could do some harm. He could wreck the master scheme, for he brothers could dream. Your mama ain't no saint, your daddy died in a shallow stream, but your uncle Dr. King did have a dream, my brother. And what is your real excuse? Why can't you study your lessons and stay in school? Why can't you study your lessons and stay in school? Free love and sex ain't nothing but a game. Don't never last, try hope. Take a chance on love, register to vote. Money ain't everything, but you could buy her